promise. And we are live on AUS Prop Investors. We bring the big names and we have the big fun. And this week we bought the big cold for all those, unless you're in Queensland. But and of course, New South Wales is going to belt Queensland Rugby League tonight. Sorry for all the non-sporting fans, but I just had to get that out there. It was the elephant in the room. New South Wales is better than Queensland League. So Jason, how are you going?
I'm great, Jeff. How are you, mate?
Yeah, fantastic. I feel like I was busy today, but I don't actually know what I achieved. So, yeah, it concerns me when I have days like that. But no, it's a good day going well. Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
Joe, how about you? How's your what's cracking in your? How many deals are you finding deals through, Jason?
Not well, maybe not. We don't talk about deals with Jason. No. Jason is not a deal finder. He doesn't know. Jason's an amazing property manager, and he helps me a lot.
He helps you vet them though, because he helps you make sure the deal actually stacks up from a location, all these kind of things. So I think he's a lot more important than the person who finds the deal, because he makes you he checks if the deal is good. I'll tell you.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. I think a property manager is one of the most underutilized resources in the investors toolkit for sure. Like if you are a property investor and you are looking around for looking in a new area, jump on the phone to property managers, because they have more of a vested interest in making sure that you get a good property, because they want to lease out that property and not have a rubbish tenant. If they're not going to say, hey, buy in this terrible area because I'm going to have a nightmare of a tenant on my hands. No, they're going to be more favorable to you. So yeah, it's awesome having access to Jason. He's an expert in the Adelaide market, so it's cool. There's a lot of deals going on down there still, but there was an instance last week. We had an open home. There was 90 groups through.
Wow.
So it's still hot, still stuff going on down there. But how are you, Jeff? How was your day, mate?
Yeah, we already spoke. I said I was busy, but I don't feel like I achieved much, Joe. But no,
well, there you go. So
exactly, I'm going through the same thing again. It's happening. I'm getting. I feel like I'm doing a lot, but I don't actually. Yeah, no. I'm speaking of Adelaide's and being hot. The thing that I think may be interesting is on everybody's lips is the RBA cash rate decision yesterday, 0.5%. Yes. I mean, that's insane. Sort of. If you're to make that in one day on you. But yeah, I'm just interested to hear. Let's have a quick kind of a quick preamble, and then we'll get into the quotes of the week. So what are your thoughts on that, Jason? As somebody who's been around property for heaps of years.
Well, funnily enough, on my way home last night, I heard a news headline from one of the pessimistic, because I don't watch free-to-air television, but I heard on the radio, and I called Joe, and I'm like, you cannot believe this news headline. I just heard, tune in tonight to Channel Blah so we can unlock for you the disaster of the highest interest rate rise in 82 years. And I'm like, oh my God, these people, seriously. Look, we were talking just before the show, and I think the interesting thing is sure, it's an interest rate rise, and I think we've got a little bit more to go. And 1% in total is on a $500,000 mortgage is about $5,000 a year or $100 a week, give or take. But let's not lose sight of a couple of things. They're still the lowest interest rates in world history. 20 months ago, they were 3.5%, or 1.9 was the cash rate. So even if we get to 1.5, 1.6, it's still lower than it was pre-COVID. So it's still a good rate in the grand scheme of things. Sure, that $100 a week. Where I am concerned is the consumer is always the one that ends up paying for this. And given that tenants have had so many rent rises as it stands as a result of an undersupply of product, because so many people have moved back to Australia since the pandemic, my concern is tenant stress more than landlord stress, because ultimately the tenant is the one that's going to pay another $100 a week, despite the fact that they're already paying another $70, $80, $90, $100 a week.
So why would the tenant pay more Like when so I'm an investor and my property price, my mortgage goes up, but do I hand that all on to the tenant? How's that work?
Of course you do. Why would you pay for that? Like if you owned a McDonald's franchise and the cost of beef goes up, are you going to go, oh, I know, I'll continue selling a hamburger for $9.95 even though beef's gone up? Of course you're going to charge the consumer. It's no different in the grand scheme of things. It won't happen overnight. As investors, we have to wear it. And I think on some moral level, it might be a joint partnership in this time. I don't think we'll pass, but the bank's passing it on to us. Why would we not be passing it on to the tenant? Like it's saddening that, like, it genuinely concerns me that rents are going to go up for tenants.
Yeah.
But the landlord, but we won't alone foot the bill, the landlord. It's going to be the tenant as much as the landlord, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, right? Like rents have raised 30-40% in the past year. So from an investor's perspective, as long as you haven't over leveraged too hard, our rents are going to be covering this difference anyway. And the way I kind of see it is we had a cash rate before the pandemic of, what was it? In 2019, it was, I forgot the number now, 1.7
or
1.9 before. Yeah. So I think in December 2019, it was 1.9.
And then the rates, and then we had the pandemic, right? And the government did exactly what they should have done, is try to stimulate the economy through a whole lot of money at everything. And now we're going back to normal rates. If the government had the foresight to see what was going to happen, I can guarantee they wouldn't have raised rate. They wouldn't have reduced the rates. If they could see what the pandemic was going to happen, how the economy was going to perform, I wouldn't see them raising those rates.
Well, Joe, I think we could have a whole discussion on that, though, because if they didn't do that, the butterfly effect, maybe the whole thing just collapses, Joe. Because I mean, I'm not saying it does, but it's like saying, okay, if you change it, but.
The other unforeseeable thing that happened during the pandemic is, and everyone will have an opinion on whether the government handled it well or didn't handle it well, but in some capacity it handled it well, because what we now have is 135,000 people more live in Australia, despite the fact that all the international students have left the country. All the Australian citizens have returned to the country. So therefore we currently have 135,000 more people living in Australia than we did pre the pandemic. And the international students are still yet to return this year. So by the time that occurs, we'll have about 300,000 additional people living in a country where we have an undersupply of product and an over demand of people in an additionally increasing cost rise. Unfortunately, that is going to affect rent hikes further than they are now. Like that's just plain business. Demand outweighs supply. And 7 or 8 years ago, supply outweighed demand, and all the tenants were asking for significant rent cuts, which we had to honour. To be fair, we're not asking for anything as landlords that we didn't provide when the shoe was on the other foot.
Yeah, here we go. I think we could have a whole show. Sorry, Joe, you go.
What are your thoughts on this one, Jeff? I feel like you've come prepared.
Oh well, I mean, I have thoughts. I don't know how prepared those thoughts are.
Good.
If we look at the 3-year bond yield, you're looking now at 3.2%. Now that doesn't necessarily mean the cash rate will go there. What I would say about that is that's a forecast. So you could sort of say that it could look like that, but the thing about that is if they once it gets to 1.5 or whatever it is, 1.8, and all of a sudden inflation's back in, the genie's back in the bottle, and arguably we don't measure inflation correctly anyway. So, I mean, but let's pretend that it's measured correctly and it goes down between the. They may just say, look, we've done enough. We don't need to raise them anymore. So I would say prepare for more. And if you're concerned, then make sure you sort of start tightening the belt now, because rather than waiting because it is very likely to continue to go up for who knows how long.
That's going to be my practical, putting a practical spin onto this. Do expect interest rates to rise. They're probably going to rise. If you listen to the big four banks, it's going to rise between by the end of the year 1.35 to 1.75. So do factor in an extra 1% at the end of your mortgages. So what that means is budget now. Don't put your head in the sand and say, you know what, I don't have to worry too much. Redo all your budgets and factor in an extra percentage point on your mortgage. And see what that looks like. I've got a budget calculator, a super simple, basic budget calculator that I'll revamp and make it shareable for everyone. And it's all it is just your incomings, your outgoings, the major, fuel, salary, how much you're coming in, and what the net result is. And then that might help people that might spur you along to do your budget. So if you're interested in that, pop in the comments. I don't know, budget, and we can organize that. If no one does it, then I'm not going to bother.
Sure, nobody likes a budget. Jeez, maybe you should say spending. Put it, yeah. But let's get on to I want to talk about Jason. He's the person. Yeah. He's the man of the hour. But let's get to the quote of the week, because you had quite a funny one. So what is your quote of the week, Jason? Thanks for indulging.
My quote of the week. Well, I've got two. I always like to use you should always add value. I try and do that in every aspect of my life. But my other one, which I love, is a Dame Edna Everage quote. And it is, people ask me often, how it is I manage to do so much, and I reply by asking, how is it you manage to do so little?
That's a good one. Yeah.
That's the top quote of the week for sure.
straight to the pool room, that one. No, it's interesting because you think about what, and is that something you sort of people say to you a lot, Jason? You get a lot done, and people are like, well,
I genuinely gave up watching free-to-air television in March of 2015, and I've never looked back. And I still get caught. I still get caught every now and again on Netflix or something like that. But we're all given the same 24 hours in a day. I just choose to use them differently to other people, and there's always room for improvement. I'm going through a bit of a lull at the moment, but all said and done, I probably get more out of my day than some of my colleagues.
What's the second quote? No.
Always add value.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. I thought that was more like a mindset, or there you go. Oh. You're adding value, and you brought two. So the value that you brought was that you had. I love it. That's awesome. What's yours, Joe?
Mine is from one of my favorite books, The Alchemist by Pablo Coelho, one of the best books ever. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. That's my little quote of the week. Just don't be too afraid. Like, the media is pumping all of this nonsense out about interest rates, about inflation, all these words we never heard before for the past 3 years. But it's not as bad as it looks on paper. And again, do the budget, factor it all in, crunch your numbers, and see what is possible and what it works. What about you, Jeff? What's your quote of the week?
In honor of Jason bringing two, I'm going to bring two because I just thought of one there.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know who this quote was, but things are never usually as bad as what people say they are, and they're never usually as good as well. So to dovetail off yours, but the quote, I just saw that one. I didn't think of it on the spot. The other one that I had was, information is the resolution of uncertainty. And that's by a guy called Claude Shannon, who I'd never heard of, but he's an American scientist. And I hope he's not, I did a bit of Googling, but hope he's not too crazy, but who knows? But yeah, so that to me was rather poignant, given that we're going to be talking to somebody who knows a little bit about negotiation, knows about sort of handling tenants, or not handling, but dealing with all sorts of situations, and just having an investor mindset as well. I think you're the type of person who you're a great problem solver, I'd imagine, Jason.
Yeah, That's why I'm excited to get you on, Jace. We'll jump into the ad after this, but the key thing is you've been a commercial real estate agent, a real estate agent, a property investor. You do property developments, you do property management. You live and breathe property. So I'm excited for this.
Thanks. I'm really excited to. I was saying to you earlier, Joe. You always come to these things going, oh, what can I really add in value? But I've been doing it a long time, and I live and breathe property, and I could talk about it all day, every day. Like it is a privilege that I get paid to do what I love to do for a job. And what's that other saying? What's the other quote? If you do what you love, you'd never work a day in your life.
There you go. Free.
The right mindset.
Yeah,
three quotes. That's the right mindset to have. It's the right attitude to have. Yeah, I'm excited. Let's jump into this ad.
Okay.
This live session is sponsored by Scott Agate from Hello House. Scott has created the world's first property negotiation as a service business. So what does that mean? Well, let's think about it. When was the last time you negotiated on anything over $100? Let alone a property that is going to be one of the biggest investments of your life. The vendor, they have a trained negotiator on their side in the form of a real estate agent. That's kind of like you stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson after never training a day of boxing in your life. These guys are trained professionals, and that's what they do day in and day out. And this is what Hello House does every single day as well. They negotiate on property to get the best buy price from the real estate agents. Scott Agate, he's the expert negotiator. He has been in this industry since 1995. He owned and operated 3 Bell franchises. Scott was the guy that was teaching these real estate agents all these agent games. He knows all of their tricks. Having him on your side is going to give you a massive unfair advantage and literally save you tens of thousands of dollars. Unlike other ways of purchasing property, Scott's incentives are aligned with you, the buyer, meaning the more money he saves you, the more money he makes, which is what you want. You need to have those incentives aligned. Scott has kindly offered our group a massive discount on the retainer fee for his service. So if you're looking to buy your next home or investment property, click the link below to get in touch.
Yeah, I think you need to do the agent finder certain. You seem to do that, yeah. Anyway, that's. But I think I look in the comments, and Sarah Chinchota, I'm sorry if I butchered that name, Sarah, but she said she's excited to see you, Jason. So already getting the fans rolling in.
I know Sarah very well, and she's also an incredible property manager in Melbourne.
Oh, fantastic.
Well, that was one thing actually. So many property managers reached out on these posts that we've done about saying how amazing you are. I don't like you're a superhero in the property management space. I didn't even know I was with royalty right now. That's
yeah. I think for me that pays very is very telling when somebody's colleagues are complimenting them, because they're the people that are potentially competing against you in some respects, but I suppose they're in different markets. They're not really. But I want to give you an intro, because when I was doing research, I was astounded at the types of things that you've done. You aren't simply a property baron, or I hope you don't mind me calling you a baron, but you have a wealth of experience in property management, business development, portfolio management, but also you're in the hospitality. You're in winery and function center in Adelaide, and you also operated businesses, so cafes down in sort of Melbourne in executive roles. So is there anything you can't do, Jason? I think that's good on you.
That's a cool question, and I was asked once when I first got into real estate. I was asked when I was being auditioned for one of my very first awards in real estate in my first year. And they're like, how are you going with your change of industry? And I'm like, can I be honest? I'm not aware I've changed industries. And they're like, of course you have. You've gone from hospitality management to real estate. And I'm like, and my dad taught me to pour a beer on my 10th birthday in our family pub. And I've been in the customer service industry ever since. And the only thing that I think's changed is the average cost per plate. other than that, I'm still in the customer service industry and I'm still selling something. And the only difference is instead of making someone's day or someone's night, I'm making someone's life. Only difference.
Yeah, there you go. That's a really, really great philosophy and a great. I think a lot of people get concerned when they say, "Oh, how do I change industries?" And I think it's all about that transferable skills and just sort of imagining what the value you can bring to that role. You can bring an outside perspective. But
Yeah.
the award that I love is you're in the Hall of Fame for you're a support legend. I think you won that award 3 times. So after 3 times, they said, "Well, he's going to keep winning it. So we're just going to we have to induct you into the Hall of Fame, so somebody else might get a shot." Is that why they inducted you? So you can't win it again? Or is it?
Yeah, correct. So, and I'm not allowed to win any award at all inside that coaching group anymore. So Sarah, who mentioned before, her and a couple of others that have been suggesting they're excited to see me, we're all part of the same property management business growth coaching group, and it's a really supportive community. And I'm a believer of you have to give back what you get out of something. So I'm always happy to help new members in that coaching group to grow their businesses because someone taught me once upon a time. So I'm a big give back guy.
Yeah. Before we get into the property related questions, I wanted to ask if for somebody, because we occasionally get people asking they want to move into real estate. What are some sort of things that people underestimate about the real estate industry, wanting to transition into, whether that be selling agent, buyer's agent, whatever role it is?
What they underestimate, and anyone that is listening tonight that self-manages, that has just been affected by some bad weather in Adelaide or Melbourne, and a tenant calls you at 8:30 at night because their roof's leaking on a Saturday. Imagine you had 130 of those tenants calling you at 8:30 at night on a Saturday because there's a storm. Sometimes people just don't underestimate that when things are good, they're really, really good. But when things are bad, it's happening to 130 people in your life, not one of them. And so things are really, really bad. And keeping your head above that is hard. That's the thing they underestimate. And the fact that if you're passionate, plenty of people turn off, and I think they do a really good job of it. But this job is if you're going to be successful at it, this job is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week job. And you should have a finger on the pulse most of the time. Yeah,
that's really, really powerful. And I think that's whether you're even a selling agent, like right now, it was quite hard to get listings, or even as a buyer's agent, it was hard to get sort of deals across the line. Or even as a property investor, it's hard to buy a property that actually tick your boxes. So I think if you're going to, you sort of need to just keep the persistence. So I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as someone that's kind of relatively new, I started my business, like the biggest thing is the time frame of you are always on. You always have to know exactly what's going on in the property market, what all the markets are doing and how it's all going. It is literally 24 hours. This is a break. Doing these podcasts are a break where we get to kick back and relax, and then it's back to crunching the numbers and doing the data. So it's interesting. It's an awesome industry, but it's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years how the market reacts to these interest rates. But it's kind of good. Like, I don't see the market crashing. I don't see that happening in any way, shape, or form. But I definitely do see things slowing down. But we're talking about slowing down from a 20%, 30% growth rate. Nobody wants property to continue to grow 20, 30%. That's impossible numbers that unsustainable. We need them to slow down a little bit. And the people that are really going to struggle are the ones that haven't bought the good assets in the good locations, all the property locations that are still growing. Anyway, we're going on.
I think it's going to be worse than that. Not worse than that, but I think anyone that hasn't bought any asset anywhere are the ones that are going to struggle. And I think that's the mistake that people make when they try and get into the market, is they're too focused on buying the house they want versus the house that will get them in the market. Just buy what you can afford today. When's the right time today to buy? Today.
Yesterday,
if you can afford it today, buy today. Yeah, tomorrow, if you can't afford it today, but buy what you can afford today. I think Australians, we still have that amazing dream that home ownership is a real genuine thing. But too many, we've been taught that the great Australian dream is your own home, the one you live in. And I think we should all just focus on buying a home that someone lives in.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the conversations that I'm having with clients is that, like, what are your goals? Well, my end goal is to get a property in Sydney. Oh, okay, great. So you're just going to buy one? No, of course I can't buy one. I'm building a property portfolio to allow me to get my end goal. So I'm rent vesting here in, Cronulla, right? I live in Cronulla. And if I want to buy a house here, I've got to build a large portfolio, sell that down, and then buy my dream home. That's what you have to do in the Sydney market. And that's what I'm hearing a lot of people talking about now, which is interesting. Like, it's a different way of thinking about it, but you can rent. There are going to be people now in this next cycle, in this previous cycle, that are just going to be renting forever. Yeah. Anyway, that's yeah.
I mean, well, I think that's been a case for some people, unfortunately. And but look, I suppose we're here to help people to find ways that if they do want to buy a property, live in an area, that there are avenues to go down that. So let's I want to hear about your investing journey, Jason, because you've got a lot of you've already dropped a lot of value and a lot of gold nuggets, as Joe likes to say. Tell us about that first property investment. What was it all? What was it like, and how did it go?
I was 19.
Jeez, I'm jealous.
Believe it or not, and I don't even think I've told Joe this, but I was engaged to a girl once upon a time. So my first house was with a girl, and we bought a little place, and it's what we could afford. And I think we paid $43,000 for it. Wow. The first one was in Paralowie, which is still one of my very favourite suburbs to invest in Adelaide.
It's 400,000-ish now, isn't it, in Paralowie?
If you got something for 400,000 in Paralowie today, you just stole it.
Okay.
So 3-bed, 1-bath in Paralowie at the minute is around 450, and 1 year ago it was 350.
Yeah. Yep. Wow.
Wild.
And I've done a little bit of everything since. So bought a couple of units, sold some stuff, bought. My family are avid investors, so we've got a bit of stuff, and it's a bit of everything. I like old 80s styled houses that need renovating. I like to buy stuff that can be subdivided or hammerheaded. I like to buy really easy buy and hold, set and forget, near new stuff on small blocks. So a bit of everything.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. Could I buy 10 of those? I mean, that's just $40,000. I mean, that's literally what you can only buy one at the moment for.
Yeah, I think it was 43.5 or 46.5. I was trying to think today. I can't remember.
And you overpaid.
Sorry.
And you overpaid.
It was a lot of money. And I think then we built a house that was 3-bed, 1-bath, and I think we paid 71 or 76 house and land package.
Yeah, wow. And what was the interest rate roughly at that time? We're talking the double digits at that stage, or was it?
I think it was 7 to 8%.
Okay, that's not too bad then. I mean, I know it sounds funny saying that's not too bad.
I don't recall it being greater than 8% during my adult life.
Yeah.
I definitely, my parents have told horrific stories of 17, 18% when I was a kid. But yeah, I think the most I've ever paid is 8, maybe 8.8.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a friend that had a large loan, and he fixed the rate just at 8%, and then just as the market started, like the interest rates started to tumble down. Not the place to fix rates. And maybe, yeah, anyway. But so what sparked the investment journey into you? Like, how did you get into property? So that was how you got into property, but like how did you get into property investing and fall into it like that?
That's a good question. I guess what I remember my parents worked really, really hard when I was a kid. And I'm one of 6 kids, and I don't remember us being poor, although I do remember some good times and some bad times. But I went to a good school. I had good friends. Because I'm one of 6 kids, we always lived in the bigger house than most of my friends. But I remember in my young adulthood, after the breakup with the girl, I had another partner, and he and I used to go to my parents' house every Monday night. And he said to me this one Monday, "I don't want to go to your parents' house. I'm just sick to death of talking about their money." And I'm like, "What? Like what?" And he's like, "Every time we go to your parents' house, they've bought a new car, they've bought a boat, they've bought a caravan, they've bought a piece of furniture, they're going on this holiday." And I'm like, "No, that's rubbish." Anyway, I went to my parents' house that night, and my mum goes, "Oh," and I went alone, he wouldn't come. And my mum walks in and she's like, "Let me show you my new car. I picked it up today."
Oh, that's amazing.
Anyway, I said to my
was
mum,
that?
I'm like, "Hey, we're friends. Now that I'm an adult, we're friends, aren't we?" And she's like, "Yeah, of course we are." And I'm like, "Are you and Dad doing something illegal? Like, are you growing drugs or something? Because you've got all this money and I just don't remember you having all this money." And my mum's like, "But you know why?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know why. That's genuinely why I'm asking." And she goes, "Because Jason, we sent 6 kids to school and now none of you go to school.
Makes
So
sense.
we've got all this money. Like, we sit at home at night inventing ways to spend this money." And so my parents were buying investment properties. And back then, and I think, again, same scenario, they bought little semi-detached places in a suburb called Elizabeth North. And I think, again, Mum bought some bank repossessions for about $41,000 each. And back in those days, the rent was about $130 a week.
Wow.
But those numbers were really...
Cracking return. That's a great return.
That's a great return. $120, $130 a week on a $40,000 investment. And so my mum had these little properties making $40,000 or $40 a week profit. And I'm like, that's cool. I want to get in on that. And so that's how it all began.
And then, so what was like your first like investment type of property? Was it a renovator? Was it a subdivision? How'd you fall?
No, so the first one was a little semi-detached housing trust house in Elizabeth North. And I think I paid 43 or 46,000, and it was an ex-trust home, and they did what they deemed renos. And keep in mind, this is 1993, 4, 5. I can't remember the exact date, but I was young. I was still 20, maybe. And, you know, those heritage tiles were the rave. And I remember saying to my mum, because there was, this house had green and beige checkered tiles. And I'm like, "I don't like the tiles." Like, I was using the emotional side of my brain. And my mum said, "Are you ever going to live here? Ever?" And I said, "Never. Like, never going to live here." She goes, "What do you care? What do you care what the tiles look like?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, of course. I'm not going to live here. Someone will like them. I don't have to like them." And so I got that one for 40. It was 40-something thousand.
What were some of the investing principles that you learned from your mum? Because she sounds like a big influence in your journey. What were some of the key principles you learned from her?
Oh, good question. I don't have to like it. Don't get emotionally attached.
Yeah,
And
that's a great one.
yeah, I don't have to like it. The tenant's going to ruin the yard anyway, so don't worry if it's crappy. And back in those days, Mum taught me, when I was buying low socio stuff, so the principles for me were solid brick, timber floors or carpets that could be ripped up so the floors could be polished and stained.
Yep.
Because then, what can they actually do? Like, you've heard all those horror stories, and I think the horror stories were way worse 20 years ago than they are today, because the insurance policies weren't as good as they are today. So if it was solid brick, if they got into domestic violence and punched the wall and broke their fist, well, okay, bad luck. You won't do that again, will you? Whereas now they punch a wall and they put a hole in it and it's an insurance claim, if you can prove it was malicious damage.
Yeah, I've heard of insurance companies like where someone's done that and they're like, oh, I'm going to replace that hole in the wall because it looks like a fist, but we're not going to replace that one because that looks like the door handle has gone into the door. And can't be considered malicious. So we'll get the patcher and painter in and we'll fix that hole, but not that hole. Be choosy of your insurance policies. So read them properly. So what are some of the what are some of the investing things that you've learned along the way? Like, have you evolved? Did you start out small scale renovations in low socioeconomic and then start to get into subdivisions and then start to get into developments, or what did it kind of look like along the way?
Okay. So for me, my first strategy was always just buy and hold. It didn't occur to me ever to sell something. Was the first thing, and therefore I started out not intending to develop. I became a developer with my mate Ross along the journey, and so for me, what happened was I just went to the market buying houses and using my favorite quote, "You should always buy value." I always bought houses that needed a little bit of work, and our family, it became an unwritten rule. So I mentioned before, I'm one of 6 kids. So if someone bought a house, because we all do it as a hobby, you buy a house on settlement day, the skip arrives. So whoever's bought the house takes Friday off of work. The skip arrives, all the tools arrive. You've got to bring everything. And then all your brothers and sisters and mum and dad rock up at the house after work on Friday. Whoever's house it is has to supply beer and pizza for the whole weekend. Friday night, you pull out the kitchen, you pull out the old curtains, old carpet, strip the house bare, and it all goes in the skip. Saturday, all hands on deck, painting inside and patching and getting it ready. We've pre-ordered a Bunnings kitchen that gets installed on Monday and Tuesday. The new polished floorboards get done on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because they need time to set. The finishing touches happen the following weekend, and the gardens are given a freshen up, and it's on the rental market 10 days later.
Wow, that's a very condensed time frame. I like it. It's did you sort of did you do that because you had to, or you just thought you wanted to make sure you weren't out of pocket?
Well, I think it was a combination of both. I think everyone was just so happy to help someone because they were all proud of the fact that we'd achieved it pretty young, is part of it. I think the other part of it is you just see these people that it just drags on and on and on and on. Like, I can do a reno these days in about 6 weeks, and I use a lot more professional help and do a lot less of it myself. But back in those days, every cent counted. And so you just did it yourself. And I rarely did bathroom renovations. So I always tried to find sound houses that had, because those old tiles in the 60s and 70s, they're actually beautiful tiles. They're really high quality. There's some garish colours, but if you pick the right colour in the kitchen, then it blends through. So I rarely replace the bathrooms. I just do a new vanity unit, a new shower screen with a door, new towel rails, and new mirror, and you've got a new bathroom, a new looking bathroom for $2,000.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
One thing that I always think through my, actually not even all the properties that are of the older age of like 30, 40 years older, if you are doing a pest and building inspection, there will most likely always be high moisture reading behind the shower wall. So if there is a shower there, always expect that. So if you see it on your pest and building, don't automatically, oh my gosh, the place, I need a plumber, I need to spend thousands of dollars. It's generally because they don't have waterproofing in them, and the water is leaked through the grout in the tiles, and it's kind of seeped in through the back. So you can fix it. You just need to reseal the tiles. Sorry,
that's actually most common in houses that aren't solid brick in the 80s and 90s. It's a very common 80s, 90s problem, and particularly in the main bathroom and particularly in the laundry trough. But who cares? Like, one day it will pop, and the day it does, fix it. But till then, oh well. And usually it's still an insurance claim. So you're better off waiting till it pops and makes a huge mess, because fixing the problem is your problem, but fixing the mess that the problem created is claimable on insurance. So fix it when it's a problem.
I want to ask a question about it, given you are a property manager and you're somebody who really knows you are somebody who knows the tools of trade. What are some of the, I know this is potentially a thing that you may not, but insurance policies, what are the gotchas, what are the things that questions people should be asking of those insurance policies to make sure that
Sure. I'm far more, good question, and I think we also will come back, Joe, in a minute, because we started talking about my entry level, but we didn't get to development, so I'll come back to that in a sec because we sidestepped, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So with insurances, keep in mind there are two policies. One is the landlord protection policy and one is the building policy. And I think one of the big mistakes that people make is they use all the big insurers and they get a joint policy, and that's a terrible mistake. I'm not opposed to you using whoever you choose to use for your building policy, but I'm pretty pedantic about who you should use for a landlord policy, and it should be a specialist company. I'll list a few because, again, I'm not a financial planner. I'm a guy with a hobby. I shouldn't recommend one over the other, but EBM, MGA insurance brokers, Terry Shear are all great landlord policies, and they all have pros and cons, such as some have better pet cover, some have better malicious damage cover, some do account for depreciation, some don't. So I always say, go find your tenant and then get the right policy for the tenant. And you should review that annually with the tenant. And as an example, one provider has amazing pet cover, and I mean $65,000 worth of pet cover. If you're hesitant about putting in a German Shepherd, well, put in the German Shepherd. Just get the right policy to cover you.
Is a pet going to burn down a room or something? How do you get $65,000 worth of damage?
Oh, I've never seen it that bad, but the reality is, if you had a big dog and someone left it inside for a week and it shat everywhere and
you'd have to get some serious dry cleaning,
skirting boards, etc. It's reasonable. You've got some policies that have $500 worth of cover. Well, honestly, that's ridiculous. So just find the right policy. So with building policies, There are good and bad ones, and you should read the PDS. But with the building policy, I'm not too concerned as long as it's got a low excess, because some of those big companies and some of those online companies and some of the supermarket companies have got $1,000 excesses. But if your tenant hits, because the most common reason we make a building claim is because a tenant hits the roller door with their car. So it's $1,000 excess on a $1,500 roller door. That's a stupid claim. Do you know what I mean? So try and get $300 to $500 excesses, because they're reasonable, and it's then reasonable that we can on-pass that charge to the tenant. Whereas at $1,000 excess, if the tenant disputed that and we ended up in a tribunal, the tribunal would punish the owner for having a crappy policy.
Yeah,
because that's not the tenant's fault that the owner's got a stupid policy.
There's so much gold.
Going back to landlord policies, the other thing a good landlord policy needs to have is an element of contents insurance. So owners go, well, I don't have any contents. Well, actually you do. If the house burned down tomorrow, and throughout my career I've had 2 houses burned down. But if the house burned down tomorrow, your carpets aren't building, they're contents. Your white goods aren't contents. Your white goods are contents. Your air conditioning is contents. Your blinds are contents.
Yeah.
So you need about 30K in contents cover on your landlord policy.
Yeah, wow.
These people overlook that. So some of those crappy policies have no contents. I came across one today, and it had no contents. So again, if the house burned down, it would be your responsibility as the landlord to replace those all yourself, because it's not covered on your building.
Yeah, you just have a blank canvas of a property half ready to go. So people are asking in the comments, what were those insurances again? There was EBM, Terry Shear.
EBM, Terry Shear, MGA insurance brokers are my 3 that I use regularly. And I don't ever suggest to an owner just one. I always suggest a couple and then get them to compare.
Yeah. I think that's the sort of thing I'd not ever considered, like having matching insurance policy to the tenant. If the tenant's got a pet, as you say, German Shepherd, you just don't know what kind of course you vet them with your questions. But yeah, that's amazing. Like, thanks for sharing all that information. That's very detailed. Fantastic. Should we talk about the next steps in your investing journey? I took us on a garden.
So then what happened is we accidentally, I guess, fell into a development with my mate Ross. Him and I have done several over the years now, but he just didn't have enough money to complete a deal on his own. So he asked Mum and I whether we'd go into partnership with him, and we bought a house in a suburb in Adelaide called Morphett Vale, which is one of my favourite suburbs in Adelaide. And so we renovated the house, did a hammerhead block, sold off the land and kept the house. And
so good. That's one thing, actually, what Ross did there.
That's when I realised that that's the keys to the kingdom.
The keys to the kingdom is subdivision and development. But think about that from not so much your perspective, Jason, Ross's perspective of, hey, I don't have enough money. What am I going to do? I know I'm very interested in property development. I know I'm, studying it, learning it, and he had the skills, he had the time, he just didn't have the capital. But he went out there and got a joint venture with you guys. So, that's all you need for a development or a deal, is someone to find the deal and run the deal, someone to give you the capital, and someone for the borrowing capacity. So if you can if you're lacking in any of one of those elements, you can find someone and you can get that going. So that's awesome that he just came to you guys for that. And it worked.
And I think everyone knows someone that could get hold of $250,000 if you really stopped and thought about it. And the very first time we did a deal, we had the lawyer draw up a joint venture agreement that outlined who does what and who gets this bit and who gets that bit. We had an amazing relationship, and we've never, ever used that piece of paper since. And the reason we haven't is because we both made, I think we made $67,000 out of that deal in 6 months, which is, you know, some people make that in a year actually working. Like that was just some evenings and weekends in a 6-month period. And so I say to people that we don't need that piece of paper anymore, because there's so much money at stake that neither of us is going to damage that relationship for one bad deal. Because now we're averaging 4 deals a year together, and it's a lot of money.
Yeah, you don't want to ruin that train. One of the things I'm interested in is you went straight down the middle, 50-50. So how was it set up? Or was that he would do the developments and you guys would provide the capital and the money to be able to do it, and then he just ran with it? Like that was as easy as that.
The very first deal, to be honest, he had Mum and I put in, I think, 250,000, and I think he put in 150 of his own. At that point, he had a skill set. I was very good on the renovation side, so he had no experience in renovating. I had tons and tons of experience in renovating. So we both brought a set of skills to the party. But these days, it depends. Every deal is done differently. For the most part, Mum and I bring more cash to the table than Ross. But we bring each other in on every deal. Like sometimes he does more, sometimes I do more, but we've just got we share the deal no matter what now. And we've had plenty of deals that we've on-sold before, you know, that have ended up being options where we've just on-sold it to another investor we might know and made 30-40 grand on the way out without anything. And we've got a deal at the moment in Glengarry that is the longest deal. So on the 17th of this month, it's 2 years since that deal started. And I was just saying to him today, I've got project fatigue. Like we're going to make about 30 grand out of this deal. And I said to him, maybe 40 actually, because we had a thing that if we made more out of it, we'd get a bigger cut. But I think it's 40 grand over 2 years, which is 20 for him and 20 for me. And then because obviously my mum helps me financially, so really it's 10 for me and 10 for mum. And I said today to my mum, I'm like, you know, I worked out that when I was 16 flipping pizzas at Pizza Hut, I made more an hour then than I'm going to make on this deal. But that's our worst deal. It was still a good deal. It's still
made money.
Yeah, still 10 grand I wouldn't have. And I learned something really amazing, because you and I were talking earlier today, Joe, about CDP, which is Council Development Plan. So the federal government the state government overtook the councils in the development plan sector in South Australia in July of last year.
Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to talk to.
And that was the game changer in this deal, because we had that deal decline 3 times until they changed the CDP. So we just sat and waited.
Yeah. Okay. That's annoying. How do we foresee that in the future? Like, how do we make sure that we, like, the key lessons that you learned from that deal, so I don't have to make them anymore?
So avoid marrying council, because they're a nightmare to deal with. Is rule number 1. No, that's not true. Do understand that every council has things they do and don't like. and some are pro-development and some aren't, and some prefer for the house to come down in its entirety and split the block 50-50. Now, we've talked before, Joe, I'm not a big fan of tearing down houses. I think that's a false economy. You buy a house to tear down a house to build a house. That's bizarre to me. So, and I've never been able to genuinely make the numbers work on a tear down unless it was an absolute bargain because it was burned down. And we did do one where it was burned down. So we did get it. My mum, my sister and I, we did our very first development, which I just forgot about until now. That was a burned out house that we tore down and built 3. So there was money in that, but I've never made it work when it's 2. The money doesn't stack up. So the only way I can see a 1:2 work is a hammerhead block or a corner block where you retain the main property.
Yeah. Or what about a 1:3 if the block size is large?
1:3, perfectly good. And so as a result of the CDP in South Australia last year, row dwellings is now a very common thing. And so a row dwelling is 3 long, skinny houses with a single garage, a small living area or study at the front, and a very long house joined by a box gutter. You can't sell off the blocks. You have to build all 3 yourself, but that's turning out quite profitable.
So yeah, actually, that's what I wanted to talk to, is understanding some of the eccentricities and the rules around development in Adelaide. So since the government took over the council's rules, they've then blanket ruled most of Adelaide. They've blanket ruled Adelaide with some regulations around subdivision and developments and stuff like that. What are some of the key takeaways that I guess someone from Sydney or Melbourne, out of state, should know about developing or looking to develop in Adelaide?
Sure. Good question. Let's start with straight splits before we go into hammerheads. So general rule of thumb, 300 meters per block.
Yep.
Frontage, if you're tearing down a house and splitting 1:2, then 18 meters wide or 9 and 9 is really the minimum. There's some flexibility if you were 8 and a bit, like there is a bit of flexibility around that number. And my mate Ross is the kind of person you want in your pocket in terms of Ross and I have been doing it a long time. So therefore we've got pretty good relationships with most town planners in most council areas. So therefore pushing some boundaries tend to work for us, but there are boundaries that can be pushed. If you're talking a corner block, then the rear needs to be 300, but they usually want a 10-meter width because the width of the house is not as the width of the previous house means it's not long enough. Does that make sense? I'm trying to explain it better. So if you imagine there's a corner block at the back of the home, because if you were 30 deep and 15 wide, or 30 deep and 10 wide, whereas at the back, because you're only 20 wide, you've got to be 15 deep. Does that make sense? Have I made that confusing enough?
I'd like a diagram. We need a whiteboard or something. No,
so if you're retaining the back house, you need 4 meters from the back of the home to the fence line.
Otherwise they're just too close to each other. You need some sort of separational space.
Even though it's perfectly acceptable in a brand new development for it to be 70 centimeters away from each other in a like, it's just baffling still to me that there's still contradiction in their own roles. But they're trying to preserve those older suburbs. So I kind of get that they're trying to create a little more open space. Then when you're keeping an old house, usually that means that there's verandas and things that are already on the home. So for the planning process, pull them off, get your development, and then put them back, because they don't care, because it's been approved in the past. So you're still allowed to have your veranda, but during the process, they want you to pull it down so it's open space, and then you just put it back up after the approval.
Oh, that's super interesting. Okay, so
Which is what we're doing at Glengarry as we speak. The roof goes back on tomorrow.
So you tore down the thing and then put it back up like that.
We
I
left
guess
the
that's
structure there. So we left all the framework there. We just pulled the alcinite off. They came out and signed off on it, and the alcinite goes back on tomorrow.
A waste of just bureaucratic crap.
My uncle made a few $100 in some labor, you know. Keep it in the family.
So, okay, so minimum lot size subdivision is 300 meters square for general neighborhood. There are some other zonings that you can look at that allow you to go smaller, to add those road dwellings and those type of things.
Yeah, the road dwellings usually 250.
250 square meters. And then the frontage on those is 5. What's the frontage on those?
Usually around 6. They'll make some exceptions at about 5 3/4, but usually around 6. To get 3, you really want an 18-meter block.
And one of the other things I wanted to get out to people, I guess, is in Adelaide there are a lot of trees, which are a good thing. We want to keep lovely trees, and but there are things called significant trees on a block. Now you don't care about them. You don't care about a significant tree, but the council cares about a significant tree. What exactly, can you talk to that? What does this all mean?
Sure. So a significant tree usually has a base that's about 1 meter wide and is at least 1 meter high. So, and gum trees are fairly prevalent lots of councils grew lots of gum trees in the mid to late 80s in plenty of pockets of South Australia. So they do exist. You can get council approval to get them removed, and to get your council approval is about $500, and to get it removed, a very significant tree, because let's be honest, if it's got a 1 meter wide base, it's pretty high. So it's a pretty significant tree. So to remove a tree is about $5K.
Yeah. Wow.
You just have to factor it into your budget when you crunch your numbers. I've never not looked at a project because there's a tree on the block. I've just budgeted for it.
Yeah, there's a block at the moment.
And you definitely call the council. No, you're calling the council anyway to check whether or not you're going to be able to get your 3 into 1, your 1 into 3, or your 1 into 2, or whatever it is you're doing. So you just ask that extra question at the same time, and they're usually pretty good.
Yeah, well, because they have a significant tree overlay and they know that there's a tree there, so you can't just take it down and do it in that case. But yeah, there's a property on the market that's been on the market for ages now, and it has a massive gum tree. So it's gum tree, and there's another tree type thing called a willow myrtle, which I've never heard of before, but it looks like kind of gum tree-ish leaves. But those two are protected species, so if they're on there as well, they're protected and significant. So watch out for those. In terms of the development side of things, are there any other kind of Adelaide eccentricities? Actually, while you're thinking of that, I've got another tree one. If you have a block set up, like a 600 square meter block, and you've got an 18-meter frontage, you can then subdivide that 1 into 2. But if there is an overhanging canopy of the neighbor's gum tree, a significant tree over the top of your house or over your lot, that may hinder you being able to build onto it, because the canopy is believed to have the root system underneath the height of the canopy. So factor that in. So if you see a massive gum tree that's just overhanging over the block, just be a little bit just chat with council and just talk with the town planner, but just have that in the back of your mind.
And I'll add to that, because I've had it come up very recently at a property.
Oh, really?
council, in the council verge at the front of the home, there was a significant tree that needed to come out in order to create the second driveway. And so we had to work with council to change the layout of the house to put the driveway on the other side of the border so that we didn't affect this tree.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Would you not be allowed to remove it? They said no.
Well, it was just more cost effective in this instance to change the placement of the house. Instead of having, we were going to have the two driveways together in the centre, we just made the decision to put the two driveways on the outer boundaries.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, so trees are a big thing.
And the main reason I like to put the two driveways together, just because then the masters are opposite each other, so that you're not creating noise for one another. You know, you don't want a master bedroom and a master bedroom. You know, one person's wife might be more verbal than the other. That's not very neighbourly.
It's not very neighbourly at all. We got a good question that's come up here. And yeah, what are your thoughts? What are the standard size blocks in Adelaide that is pretty common for sale? 1:2 or 1:3. In Queensland, 809 blocks is mostly subdividable into 2. Thank you, Facebook user.
Okay. So general rule of thumb is you're looking for something more than 600 metres. Yep. If you're wanting to do a hammerhead, there are a couple of extra rules.
Oh, so true. Yes. What are they?
Yep. So for an ideal hammerhead, you should be looking for 700, but in a truly ideal world, in a hammerhead, 750 to 800. And so what you want from the side of the home to the fence line on a hammerhead, in a super ideal world, you want 5 metres clearance, but in an unideal world, you can push the boundaries with council. If you're at about 4.2, you can usually stretch it, because you need 1 metre for the new fence line down the side of the home, a 3 metre wide driveway, and they prefer 50 centimetre plant verges either side of the driveway, but they do make allowances on those if you want to. One of the things in Adelaide, in a lot of the stock that in that 80s, 90s, one of the things that you can do is, you know, in the 80s and 90s and even the 70s, plenty of people didn't build carports under main roofs. It was very common to put a Stratco carport to the side of the home. So that can easily come down and be included in your 4 to 5 metres. And then you just put a new single or double carport, a pitch roof at the front of the home.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I've noticed with Adelaide is that that rule, that 5 metre rule, is very challenging to find. So I feel like they reject it. They're trying to reject the battle axe, where there's one house at the front and one house at the back. And they're more interested in having row houses where there's a house here, here, and here. Because if they were doing that, they would have, if they weren't interested in expanding out the row houses, they would have increased the frontage by 1 more metre. So 18 metre frontage in Adelaide is very, very common. 19 and 20 metre frontages are a lot less common, and there would be far few more developments going. But that 5 metre rule for the battle axe doesn't allow them to do much. Like, you can, it's hard. Like,
Well, the other factor is we simply, because we had larger blocks, compared to other states in the 70s and 80s, we just built carports under main roofs. The other states didn't, because the block was smaller to begin with. And so it's harder. It's not that it's impossible. It's just there's a lot more work involved in pulling down a carport under a main roof versus one where there's a Stratco veranda on the side that can be just pulled off.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what we'll do, we'll jump into our final ad for the evening. But what I want everyone to do is throw some comments into the little comment box there. And I feel like we nerded out a little bit. Sorry, Jeff. about Adelaide subdivision. But
Mate, I've actually done a development in Adelaide, so I'm I could talk you through a few things. So don't you worry.
Yeah, exactly. What I wanted to cover off as well, Jace, is you've been an agent, a selling agent, a property manager, property investor, property developer, and I'd love to get some of like your hot negotiation tips or things that we should be aware of when we're negotiating with agents and how to maximize some of our returns and get the best going.
Okay,
that would be cool.
Are we doing that after the ad or no?
Yeah,
we'll do it after the ad. Let's. I got to remember who's
got to pay the bills.
Commercial property offers the highest cash flow in Australian property investing, offering exceptionally higher yields than residential. Now, we're talking 8 to 10% net yields. That's cash after all expenses, not this 2 to 6% gross that we see in the residential space. So for those that are starting out on their commercial investing journey, it can be exciting, but it's also a step not to be taken lightly. The expertise of a commercial buyer's agent can pay dividends to help you secure that high cash flow and high growth potential property. And this is why we recommend Steve Polisi of Polisi Property. With over 6 years experience in the space, Steve has over 1,200 property transactions under his belt. He has seen it all and knows the best locations right for growth. In a previous life, Steve was a chartered mechanical and structural engineer, so he draws on his mathematical and analytical skills that he's developed to break down what works best in commercial property. As with engineering, same goes with commercial property. It's based primarily on the numbers. So if you're curious about diversifying into commercial property, you have access to $100,000 in cash or in equity, book a call with Steve today and find that perfect asset for you.
There we go. That's
boy, I miss commercial property.
you miss it. What is so how long were you commercial manager for?
I did commercial property management and sales for 5 years. But because I left the family business to go and learn my skill elsewhere and then returned to the family business in 2019. And there's no emotion involved in commercial property. It is just numbers. You know, it's yield. Simple as that. If it yields, I've done deals on the phone, sight unseen, based on you should buy it because you have an appetite for this product and it's going to yield 8%. There's no emotion. They don't care what it looks like. They don't care if it is or isn't air conditioned. It's what's the rent, who's paying the outgoings, and who's paying your property management fee, me or the property manager. That's as technical as it gets in commercial.
Actually, that's an interesting thing. What are some of the things you see? Because you deal with a lot of investors, you've dealt with a lot of commercial investors. Like if someone's investing in commercial, they're generally a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more. But what are the things and the traits that you see more qualified or more sophisticated investors doing that normal investors aren't doing? Like, how do they? I don't know. What
there is no emotion involved is the first thing. So it's just an investment for them. Is the most important one. The second one is that they are looking for investments that are commercial because the tenant pays all of the outgoings. That's a really critical factor between, and even the big residential investors. The main variable is the amount of cash flow they have, you know, because usually to do a commercial deal, you need between 60 or 60-40 or 70-30 ratios on the LVR. So that's the main difference. The other cool thing is in commercial, you know, a lot of people can use this. It's far more common to use their superannuation. So most people have got more superannuation than they've got free cash floating around.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. So we're in a hot market. Well, I mean, some markets are hot. Sydney's coming off the boil a little bit. Melbourne's coming off the boil a little bit. But Adelaide's it's very hot. What are some, being on the agent side where you've negotiated trying to sell properties for people, what are some of the tips and tricks we can utilize ourselves?
Well, I think it's a case of, and I still buy a lot of properties for
Yeah.
plenty of interstate investors. And I think what's really important, first and foremost, is we've all got that high maintenance aunt. You know, when you're going to go deal with an agent, it's a 30 to 60 day relationship. They've got to imagine dealing with you for 60 days. Don't be a nightmare. Don't call them 7 times. They will call you back. It's a hot market. We're getting 150 calls a day. We will call you back. Just take a breath. But if you call me 11 times, you're not going to be the number one person I call back because you're already hard work. So tone it down a notch. I know that you're desperate for that property. I know you're missing out week in, week out, but just calm your farm. Don't be high maintenance. First tip.
Okay.
Second tip is that at the moment, so in South Australia, we've got 48 hours calling off from when the Form 1 is served. The Form 1 is the statement of facts. You know, each state calls it something different, but most of them have something, but not every state has a calling off period, but we do have a 48 hours business calling off period. So one of the first questions I ask when I'm speaking with an agent is, has the Form 1 been prepared yet? The reason that's important is because if that's not being prepared, that can usually take 3 to 5 days, which actually means if you go 3 to 5 days plus my 2 days calling off, if I play this right, I'll actually have a week to call off. Now, not that you intend to call off, but I then, as often as possible, I'll say to the agent, look, I won't put subject to building and pest in the conditions, but I will get it done during the calling off period. Is that okay? And most agents will agree to that because too many people are buying that they're going, I want 7 to 14 days for building and pest. Then I want 30 days or 21 to 30 days for finance. It's just too extending. You know, if we just, the only subject to you should have is finance. And if you can get a pre-approval and remove that, then I'm not telling you do it, but it's your call to make because each person's financial circumstances are different. But the less amount of conditions you've got on a contract is the more chance you're going to have of success, because conditions are more important than price at this. Well, they're as important as price in this moment.
Well, particularly when you've got a multiple, when you've got 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, 9 contracts signed after for the first open, you're going to think, well, okay, am I going to take this one that wants, as you say, 28 days finance, 14 days pest and building? Am I going to take the one who's got the 2 business days calling off and it's come 7 days finance?
The next thing is when you look at houses these days, you can see an owner-occupied, like you jump on realestate.com, you look at the photos, you can see a tenanted property from an owner-occupied property from a styled property pretty easily these days. They fall into 3 categories. But if you're buying an owner-occupied property, right, ask the questions about where they're going, what their plan is. Because if they've not found somewhere else to go, then you're an investor. Say, hey, I'm going to offer this, but please do assure them that I'm happy to create a rent back period for them so that they can use that opportunity to find their perfect home. Because that's a solid negotiation tool in this marketplace, because people are selling and haven't yet found somewhere else to go. So give them that opportunity to find somewhere else to go. The next thing is, you know, and we were talking about this the other day, Joe, you're like, someone, not you, but someone missed out on a deal because of a $5,000 deposit, right? Yeah. And in low socio areas, that matters. Like, you know, $5,000 is reasonable, but I'm an agent. I love my job, but I don't do it for free. So the commercial reality is the deposit goes into the agent's trust account, whereas everything else goes to the conveyancers. So beyond settlement, if the deposit's low, if it's $5,000, you settle on Friday, but as an agent, I don't get paid for another week because I've got to wait for the money to come in. So I'll always fight harder for the guy that's paying enough. He's putting enough skin in the game to make sure I get paid on payday, because then it settles on payday and my agency gets paid and we send the conveyancer the change on settlement day. Do you know? And that's a huge factor. People think it's not, but it is.
Yeah.
So general rule of thumb, just in your head, most agents charge in or around 2%, and then they usually charge around $3,000 in marketing fees. So on a $500,000 purchase, you should be 2% plus GST, which is $11,000 plus $3,000 in marketing. You want your best hope of securing that property, your deposit should be $15,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. The deal,
because if you offer $5,000, Joe, and I offer 15, but all the other conditions are the same, I tell you here and now, my deposit's going to win the day.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we were talking about, because we had $8,000 less as our price, because I don't overpay, I don't overbid up. Unfortunately, you lose a deal because people get emotional, which is what that person did, but they didn't give enough deposit. And $8,000 is massive, but purely because. So, is there a percentage ratio that you kind of use, like a rule of thumb, like 3% or 5%? Like, what's the minimum that you'd go to?
Sorry, can you ask that question again? I apologize.
Oh, like, is there a percentage rule that you're saying $15,000? Is there a percentage rule that you go for like 3%, like minimum 5%?
Well, I think if you account for 3%, that should include your marketing costs. You'll be pretty safe most of the time. But if you did 2% plus 3,000, you'd also be close.
Yeah. So some
and
places.
If you were off the mark, right? So let's say I offered a $12,500 deposit, and the agent came back to you and said, look, they're pretty happy with the conditions. Could you go to 15? Yes. Because the agent is actually saying, I'm not going to get paid out of this deal. Can you make sure I get paid? Yes. Like if they come back and ask for 30, like a stupid number, they're just being idiots. But if they ask for a couple of grand more, it's that they genuinely are saying, I want to get paid on payday. Because plenty of agents live paycheck to paycheck, even though they make really good money. And right now the business is booming. But when things aren't booming and you're doing a couple of deals a month and you get paid once and then you don't get paid again for another 30 days, when things are tough, things are tough. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you got plus you got your fancy cars. It's a
correct. We've got our egos that we have to carry around in BMWs and
private school fees, of course, if you've got kids. Yeah, all that stuff.
Correct. And you know, I was talking to my colleagues when I was on the Sunshine Coast last week in commercial. In 2015 and 2016, business was bad. Like, it was still on the back of the GFC. The business I was working in had a bit of a rap publicly in terms of some people had left. And the three agents, and we're still best mates, the three of us, but we would sit together on a Friday because someone had a deal settling, and we'd go, I've got 600 in the bank, I've got nothing. And we would share our cash to get us through the weekend because someone had a deal coming or settling on Monday, and then we'd share that deal knowing that someone else had a deal settling later in the week, and we'd share that deal. So when things are tough, things are real tough. So that making sure we get paid on payday is actually an important factor.
Yeah, that's super important. Something that not many people, I think, factor in with the negotiation
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
The other one
The
is
next
going.
thing, sorry, how
Oh.
much time have we got? Because there's a couple other things we should be negotiating.
I'm sort of torn because I also wanted to talk property management, but I'm just
Okay. So let me add a couple other things to the negotiation of the contract. So when you're negotiating the contract, you need to, if it's professional photography, you need to ask whether or not my property manager can have that access to the professional photography to market the property. You need to ask whether or not once we're unconditional, the property manager can market the property 21 days prior to settlement so that we can advertise it. So in an ideal world, I can advertise this property for you before we settle. It settles, and you should always settle on a Wednesday. People make the mistake of settling on a Friday. Settle on a Wednesday, so I can pick up the keys on a Wednesday. My team can go and do the ingoing on a Thursday. I can get a professional cleaner or a gardener in if I have to give it a freshen up, and the tenant moves in on Friday. I love to do lease signs on Fridays because people in Australia get paid on Thursdays and Fridays. So when your rent's due Friday, there's no excuse not to pay it on time.
Yeah, that's a great.
Applying common sense to property management. That's it's good. Yeah, because you're
okay. Other PM questions?
Well, so when you're what are the three most important things when you actually when you have a property for rent? What are the three things you absolutely need to consider?
Getting the rent.
Oh yeah, I mean,
good question. So I think 3 is limited. Let's look at the application process. And one of the big ones I'm a fan of is, unless a strata or body corporate says otherwise, you should always advertise the property pets negotiable. The mistake that owners are hell-bent on no pets. I'm not saying pets are right or wrong. What I'm saying is my job as your property manager is to bring you every application in the market for you to consider. If you write no pets, I guarantee 30% of the people that will apply will lie to you about whether or not they have pets. So let's get them telling us the truth about pets, is the first thing. The second thing about pets is we can't discriminate as property managers, but some pets make more or less damage than children. So there might be instances, and I'll never discriminate, but I'll say to an owner, hey, when someone says to me, no pets, I'll say, okay, Jeff, I've got 2 amazing applications. Let me go through those with you. One is a professional couple. He's a lawyer, she's an accountant, and they've got 4 children, and they're 11, 9, 7, and 5. And I've got a professional couple. They're gay. He's an accountant and he's a lawyer, and they've got a Pomeranian. Pick. And they go, oh, well, I'll take the gay couple with the Pomeranian.
Pomeranians,
why? And I go, well, because stereotypically gay couples are clean freaks and it's just a tiny dog. And I go, yeah, but you just said no pets. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, they didn't apply because you said no pets. So my job is to bring you all the applications so that you can choose. So always go pets negotiable, because they'll be honest about their pets. And then you can choose children over pets, or a cat over a dog, or a snake over a budgie. That's your choice, but at least they're being transparent about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a
Next thing is, when you're purchasing a property, look for value add opportunities. So we talked earlier about buying crappy houses that need renovating. But my other big thing at the moment, as you know, Joe, I love buying houses with rear sheds that have some kind of add-on space, whether it be, so if there's a shed that's partially lined, to spend $5,000 on putting in some fresh floor coverings, fresh paint, split system air conditioner, so I can advertise it as a studio, possible 4th bedroom, teen retreat, etc., will add $30-40 a week to the property.
That's
then
massive.
If you're looking massive, $5,000, $5,000
Positive cash flow.
$5,000 investment for $40. You paid back in 3 years. That's a bargain. Yeah. Other ways to value add your property are when you're looking at big homes, if there's a possible way to turn, so some of the newer homes, because some people might are happy to buy the set and forget stock. So some of those newer homes have that formal living room at the front of the home.
Yeah.
So that's a great add-on because I can put in some bifold doors and turn that into a 4th bedroom. And again, that's going to generate me $30 or $40 a week as a 4th bedroom. It'll generate me nothing as a second living room. If you're getting a double garage is always better than a single garage, but get what you can get. If you've got a double garage in this day and age, spend the $500 on getting it electrified with a remote control. Now, will that generate more rent? Possibly not. But what it will do is get you a better tenant, and it will get you a more professional person because, they don't want to get out of their car in the middle of the rain.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to ask is about the conversion of the garage, because a lot of garages in Adelaide are connected to the house. Do you cut a hole in the wall and then create a 4th bedroom out of those?
So when their garage is under main roof, you can't do that as such. But some of those old rumpus rooms at the rear, the real regulations around it's got to have airflow, so it's got to have some kind of window. It's got to have a smoke alarm. And I say it's got to have a insulated ceiling, so it can't have a tin roof. And it doesn't have to have, it should have some kind of air conditioner because, usually they're hotter boxes. The insulation's not as good as the rest of the house. So in my opinion, it should have some kind of airflow device.
Yeah. Wow.
Awesome tips. Also, have you got any other little tips tucked away in there?
In terms of the value add, look, the only other thing I think in terms of the property is too many owners are fixated on fees and only fees. Now, I've told you a million times, I'm a cash flow positive guy, so deductions is not my number one priority in my investment strategy. But to me, this is no different. Every one of us works in some form of sales capacity already. Do you know what I mean? If you're selling something at home, are you the cheapest guy or are you the best guy? This is the same. You get what you pay for. I'm very passionate about what I do. I say to people, I'm not the cheapest. I'm certainly not the most expensive, but I spend my life cleaning up the mess of very cheap agents, and it's not pretty. You get what you pay for. Because it costs. So most people get really hung up on this fees, and it costs me as a business $1,800 per year to manage a property. So when someone tries and negotiates fees with me, I always look at the total fees for the year. So $500 a week at 7 or 8 or 9%, plus their inspection, plus their let fee, lease renewal, whatever fees we add. I add it all up, and if it's not $2,200 a year in fees, it's just not worth my while. I'd rather say no to the business because I'm not making profit out of it. So people get hung up on the fees, and the people that get hung up on the fees are usually the owners that have cheaper rents in the first place. And cheaper rents generally mean crappier tenants. Not always, but generally, their cheaper rents are usually a lower socio. So therefore, they're usually harder work. If an agent's asking for a good fee, just ask them to justify why and how it is. So say to them, look, someone down the road is saying 7%, you're 9%. I like you, but explain to me, I want to know exactly what your rent arrears policy looks like. Explain it to me in detail, because the guy that can answer that articulately in a low socio area is worth the extra 1%. Because you know he's going to fight for you. I say to my clients all the time, I'm self-employed. I charge between 7.7 and 9.9, depending on the yield. But I love my job, but I'm not doing it for free. So your income is that my income is a direct proportion of your income. So
yeah, that's actually one of
9%
my
of zero
one of
is
my
zero.
top tips.
So I make sure you get paid because I want to get paid. End of discussion.
Yeah, that's one of the big things that I think is whenever I'm looking. So I buy throughout New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, Perth. And the thing, every time that the recurring theme is the property managers that I work with, they always are independent agencies. They're always the best ones because their bottom line is directly correlated to your bottom line. So your incentives and their incentives are aligned perfectly. If Jason's business gets an extra $100 a week rent out of you, that's affecting his bottom line, which is a good thing. Whereas with like another agency that's just a franchise, they get $60. You get $60,000 a year. They don't care if they raise your rent $30 because they have to have an uncomfortable conversation with a tenant and you, and they're just like, nah, your rent's fine. Don't bother raising it. So that's a little tip. Look for independent agencies, not 100%. So much
and
franchises.
Look, this current rent rise is a perfect example, Joe. You nailed it. I sat down with all of my girls at the beginning of this rent pandemic or rent, whatever you want to call it. And I went, okay, girls, grab your calculator for me. I went, from this day forward, without my written consent, every rent must go up minimum $30, not negotiable, unless I sign off on it. And then I went, get your calculator, $30 a week times an average fee of 7.7%, times that by 52 weeks in a year, times by the 130 properties that you manage. And the fee income stream on that is $15,000 to my agency. So I said to the girls, if you can't prove to me this time next year that you haven't put all your rents up by $30 a week, I actually don't mind. But don't ask me for a pay rise because you're not getting one. I can't afford it.
Well, at least it's
so
very, very, very
I know
clear.
for sure my girls are putting all the rents up to suit the best interests of my owners because, like me, I've incentivized their pay rise next year. You get me 15 grand in fees, I will give you a $5,000 pay rise, no question.
Clear and transparent KPIs. There's nothing more you can ask. Nothing more, nothing less. I like it.
Correct.
I like it. I like it. We've got we'll jump into some of the comments, but I like this one. A Townsville agent justified their fees by saying they recently put the rent up. There you go.
I'll use a great example of that because I think I shared with you, Joe, we bought a little rent roll from an agency recently and the fees were relatively low. And in one of the introductory calls I made to the owner, she said to me, and she owns 7 properties, by the way, so she's a high value owner, but her fees are very cheap. And she said, I suppose you're going to put my fees up. And I said, not immediately, but every single time I generate value for you, you can guarantee I'm going to ask for a fee rise. And she said, can you give me an example? I said, yes, I can. You've got a property in Paralawi. The tenant's been there 9 years and the rent is $315. And if they moved out tomorrow, we'd get $450 a week for that property and it's due for its renewal in February. So I think I'm going to put it, unless the market climbs anymore, I'm going to put their rent up to $420 a week. Because if you want to keep it, they're good tenants, you should keep it below market, but you should only ever keep it below market by my let fee and your advertising costs. So to me, my let fee for the year and the advertising costs equate to about $1,500 a year or $30 a week. So that's all it should ever sit below the market rate, because that's still a reward for the tenants. They can go to the market and discover, they'll get mad when you put it up to $420, but then they'll go to the market and realise that's still cheap rent, and they'll still sign their lease renewal. And so I said to my owner, so when I've achieved you $105 a week rent increase, which is $5,420 per year in rent, you can absolutely guarantee I'm going to ask you for an extra 1% on your fee. And I said, which will cost you, whatever it was. And she went, and that would be justified. And I said, thank you.
I think I'd pay. I think $50 for $5,000 is probably a fair trade. Probably
correct. You would have thought.
I love that. Okay, let's have a look. We do have a bit of a, I don't know if it's a left field question. It's to be expected in the current environment. Thoughts on what might happen with a possible correction versus a crash?
Is that, are we talking from a rental perspective, or are we talking from a price?
No.
Like what does that? I need
to
be more specific.
Okay. I think I know where they're going with it, but if I'm wrong, if they could add to the comments, that would be fine. I'll start by saying there are two things. I think you need to treat South Australia differently to other parts of the state, and we're really here today to talk about South Australia. The one thing about South Australia before the boom is South Australia sat way below the market for so long. So we've had two market shifts. We've had the same boom that everyone else has had, but we also had our correction boom because the Adelaide market needed to correct itself with the rest of the country. So we've had two booms, whereas everyone else has had one. I think that's why we've had 30% rises while everyone else has had 10 to 15s. Does that make sense? I don't think the market's going to crash. I do think it's going to plateau. And that's what you said before, Joe. It's gone up at 30%. Well, that's not sustainable. I think it's going to plateau and it might possibly dip. But the one thing that people put interest rates aside for a second, put everything else aside, there's one factor economists haven't taken into consideration. That is 137,000 more people live in this country than they did before the pandemic, and the international students still have to come back. So the fact remains, regardless of everything, that demand outweighs supply, and that will happen for quite some time. I think the 137,000 people that live here now that didn't live here before the pandemic, some of those, not all of them, some of them will go back to Germany, the UK, the US, etc., etc. But that's not going to happen for a while. What's everyone doing this year? Do you know the answer to that? They're traveling. I had a holiday last week. I went on a business trip. I've got Bali planned later in the year. I'll do the US or Europe early next year. All of us, the very next thing we're doing in the next 12 months is jumping on planes and spending our disposable income in holiday destinations. Sometime late next year, when we've got our travel bug out of our system, some of us will go, okay, it's time to move back to Melbourne, move back to the UK, move back to the US. And there'll be a minor dip, but because the internationals are still coming, demand will still outweigh supply.
And I think the other thing that people, because you can't build properties that quickly either.
Correct.
Yeah, so it sort of takes, what does it take? Roughly about 2 years
it used to take a year, but now it's taking 2.
Yeah, because supply, just councils can be a nightmare as well. The other thing is that people may not have is internet, like overseas non-Australian citizens moving to Australia. Because we and whether you agree or disagree with immigration, I think we're not growing. Our population growth is probably not growing quick enough to be able to then pay back the money that we gave out. And so I think there's going to be probably a push to bring people into the country. And
agree.
Yeah. Well, and this is also, we're currently going through one of the biggest labor shortages in the construction industry, and this is one of the things we do kind of have to open up and speed up the access to our visas for skilled labor and also basic labor. But what that is going to do, if they turn that tap on, it's going to then flood the market full of more people. So it's going to be a painful rental market for the next couple of years for people until we get that supply and start building those houses. But we're still 2 years down the track from that.
Correct.
So it's being a renter is going to be very tough. Very tough.
Agreed.
Yeah. Interesting discussion. I feel like we're too pro property, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't expect anything.
Any thoughts on sloping blocks for subdivision, sewage line, and retaining costs?
I don't know about sloping blocks.
For investment and subdivision, if you're building your dream home in a location that's really important to you, then absolutely, because your heart's involved. Otherwise, don't touch it.
Yeah, well, how sloping are we though? Because if there's money, there's potentially money to be made in how big the problem is. If the problem's somewhat solvable,
is there? Because people buying a property from you don't put value in footings and retaining walls. There's no value in that. My mum built her dream home in a house like that, $65,000 in retaining walls. You don't get that money back. That's a labour of love.
Yeah. I was thinking more about the sloping. If you can really sort of pick up an absolute bargain, and it's because everybody gets freaked out.
If there's a radiant, sure, but not a slope.
Slope up better than slope down. Maybe
there's pros and cons to both. If it's a radiant, so Ross and I did a development in Sullivan's Beach where there was a radiant and we just had to have a step to allow for the radiant. That was fine.
And how's that sale going for that property?
No. So this is a different one. He just sold one. Has he told you about that?
Yeah, absurdly priced.
So he put it on for 449 to 489 and he got 569.5.
So what was it on for?
449 to 489 and he got 569.5.
Absolutely insane. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm throwing all these different questions that aren't related.
What happens when you're a double agent?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Do you see a difference in rental of units versus houses?
Yes, I do. Houses are definitely renting better than units, is the commercial reality. But there's still a place for units is the interesting thing. And there are more people moving into units than they were in the past. The inner city stuff is still not as popular because there's less international students. So you've got to keep that in mind. But if you're prepared to play the long game and you love investing in units, buying an inner city apartment now while there's a shortage of international students and someone's got mortgage stress might be a really good thing to do if you're prepared to take a hit on your rent in the short term.
The counterintuitive, no, what's it called?
Contrarian. Well,
contrarian investing, that's it. This is another great question as well. Are you still buying older style homes to invest now or more modern ones?
A combination of both, because I like them both for different reasons. So more modern ones are really great set and forget products. They're on smaller blocks. They've got good depreciation. They've got no maintenance problems, etc., etc., etc. So if you want a cash flow neutral or positive product that just takes care of itself, then the modern ones are a really great thing. But the older ones, they do need some maintenance, they do need some thing. But the reality is if you buy now and land bank in 10 to 15 years time, you can tear it down and build two on it. So there's a place for both. I'm not a financial planner. I'm a guy with a hobby. You've got to go see a financial planner to work out what's best for you.
And accountants, all those good people. This is an interesting one because this is very Adelaide Adelaide specific. Plane noise in Western suburbs an issue. What do you think?
Ironically, I live in a flight path, so that's a good question. But I am blessed with double glazing, so I don't hear anything. Is the reality. I think no different to the question on whether you live near a freeway, etc., etc. I think the people that choose to live in those locations for some form of convenience, whether it's because they travel a lot for work and therefore they need to be close to the airport. It might be, but the big factor in Adelaide compared to other states is it's all well and good to say it's the western suburbs, but our airport's 12 kilometres from our CBD. So the inner west of Adelaide is a very cheap way of living. Well, not cheap, but compared to the eastern suburbs, it's a very cost-effective way of living in a great inner city location because of the flight path. So embrace it. You're going to get a house for $100,000 less because it's in a flight path. That's okay.
Yeah, it's so close to I got off when I was in Adelaide. I got off the plane. I'm like, oh, I'm already in Adelaide. Like, it's right. Yeah, it's in the heart of it.
Like for me I caught an Uber to the airport from my house the other day, and I don't think it was $11. Like, it was definitely more than 10, but I don't think it was 11 or 12. It was cheap.
Yeah. There's much traffic in. I remember catching.
And therefore, you're happy to grab an Uber. You don't get family members. You don't inconvenience family members at 6 a.m. in the morning to go get you like you would in Sydney because it's a $50 cab fare.
Yeah, and a $20 train ride. Oh, geez, just crazy. I think that one or two more quick. Oh yeah, here we go. This is probably too long.
This is a big one. What is that?
I'm going to go with the easy one. I wanted to go with the easy one.
I like it. Okay, are you seeing a bit of gentrification? Absolutely.
What do we define as inner Western
short
Adelaide?
Answer to that is absolutely. I think we were seeing the gentrification a long time ago. So suburbs like West Croydon have been booming for about 10 years. I do a reasonable amount of investing in a suburb called Athol Park, which is one of my very first houses I ever lived in was in a place called Athol Park, 12 kilometres from the CBD. I used to joke that it was Spot the Skippy because, I was one of the few Australians, so kangaroo, Spot the Skippy. So very high Vietnamese and Indian community in that suburb. But again, for me, I loved living in that suburb because the amazing cheap eats in that location were just second to none, really good, great markets in terms of fresh fruit and produce. So that's a suburb that's boomed. Very recently, Royal Park has gone really crazy. All the beachside suburbs around Semaphore a couple of years ago. My mum bought in Semaphore for $870,000 mid-2020, and it's just been valued at 1.15. So that's a pretty good ROI. Yeah. And I think if she actually took it to market, she'd probably get 1.25, if I'm honest. But the West has gone crazy.
Yeah.
And why not? It's at the most furthest part, it's 22 minutes from the CBD. Like, that's great.
It's quite nice out that way as you go further towards Semaphore and then Largs North. I don't know if Largs is that nice, but I didn't go up to Largs.
Yeah. Well, again, Largs has boomed because what happened, obviously, is Glenelg and Henley were always and then the people that could no longer afford to live in Henley moved to Grange, and the people that can no longer afford to live in Grange moved to Semaphore. And so it's gone crazy by default. And Semaphore is a beautiful beachside country town in the grand scheme of things. You know, there's some really amazing historical buildings in Semaphore. So I love it. And it's more down to earth. There's something really pretentious about Henley Beach and Glenelg.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
Glenelg is just too touristy and not in a good way.
Touristy, yeah.
Yeah,
I saw some really green shoots, some really fantastic potential in Semaphore and Alberton actually in early 2019 because I was doing some research and that's where we did the development. And it's a shame I didn't get to keep that one because that was would have been, I don't know, I don't want to look at what it's worth now, but anyway.
Yeah. Look, I think you can't get caught in I should have kept it because I've had that conversation, Ross, and there's plenty of developments I should have kept that didn't. But selling that development cash flowed the next development, and that wouldn't have occurred if I hadn't. So it's the only time it's a bad investment. The only time you shouldn't sell is because you have no intention of buying. You should always hold as much property as you can with as much cash as you've got at any given time. Do not sell for the purpose of exiting the market. You should only sell for the intention of the next project.
Yeah.
We'll make this one the last. Sorry, Joe. I'll get this.
No. I mean, this isn't even really a question. It's more of a statement. The future of Adelaide housing will see all the 60s housed in older suburbs demolished over the next 20 years by developers and subdividers. What will happen when all the big blocks have been subdivided in Adelaide in 30 years' time? Are we living in the golden era of subdivision and development in Adelaide? Actually, that's not.
I think we're at the final stage of the golden era of those 60s styled homes, if I'm perfectly honest. I think they've got so expensive now that you're either doing it and subdividing it now, or you're keeping it and extending it, or you're buying it to land bank to build your family home on. I think what I'm seeing now already, which is why Morphett Vale, Christie's Beach and Paralowie have gone bunter, is because the 80s and 90s styled homes are the new 60s styled homes. So people are starting to buy those, to land bank those for the purpose of subdeveloping them in 10 years. Because, and I'll use Paralowie as that example, Joe, as you know, because I live, breathe, love Paralowie, and I predicted this market rise in Paralowie 15 months ago. Paralowie is a suburb that, if you look at Paralowie and Parafield Gardens and Salisbury East on a map, and you go out of the CBD in Adelaide, when I was a kid, Regency Road was in a city and Grand Junction Road was city fringe. Now Grand Junction Road is city fringe. And if you veer right onto Main North Road, you've got Ingle Farm, Para Hills, Para Vista. They've already peaked. They peaked 3 years ago. But if you keep going straight down Port Wakefield Road through the industrial section, the next suburbs you hit are Paralowie and Parafield Gardens. And if you come out of the thoroughfare, which is Kings Road, onto Port Wakefield Road in Paralowie and Parafield Gardens, you're in the Adelaide CBD in under 25 minutes. So 10 years from now, mark my words, Paralowie will be an inner city suburb, or it'll be a city fringe suburb.
Love it. Okay. I think that's a good one to end it on. You were born in Paralowie.
I should say one other thing that I didn't mention that I think is important for people to consider about Adelaide. The north-south connector is being built, and it's been built since I was 22. And there are sections of convenience, but when that road is complete in probably 10 or 15 years, what that will effectively mean is that you can get from Gawler in the far north of Adelaide to Seaford Rise in the far south of Adelaide, and that entire commute will be less than an hour. When that happens, that's a game changer for South Australia. I have no doubt that when that does happen and the road is complete, it will be a tolled road. But when that happens, the game changes in South Australia in terms of it being a convenient city to live in.
It's already the 15-minute city. It'll be the 5-minute city.
That's your mic drop. I think we'll have to get you back for a round 2 or something, because I want to really dive deep in some of these areas of Adelaide, because you live, eat, breathe, and sleep Adelaide, I think, and I think there's so much knowledge and wisdom you'll be able to share.
Yeah,
thanks. I've had a good time, so thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Sorry we went half an hour over.
No, that's okay. We usually do.
Yeah, it wasn't feel like we tricked you a little bit, but it's always the fun way. Always good conversations spill over. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time and running us through this, Jason. One of the top property managers in Adelaide. How do people get to learn a little bit more about you? And if you're an investor that has a property in Adelaide, and you maybe not getting the best property management, what should people do?
Sure. Okay. Well, our website is essentialpm.com.au. And you can email me at jason@essentialpm.com.au. And otherwise, happy to share my phone number with people as well. But it's on our website.
Yeah, I've actually, here's a link I prepared earlier.
Excellent, mate.
Even got your profile.
Oh, Lord. Yeah. We'll reach out. Yeah, anyone reach out who's looking at deals. Jason's always a fun one to have a chat.
Yeah, I'm always happy to look at something for you if people need some help. And I know you're the same, Joe.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you very much for, spending all this time covering off Adelaide. We'll have to get you around too, because this was too much fun.
Cool. No worries, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, people are loving it as well. I really appreciate you taking the time and just sharing your wisdom, because a lot of people hold it close to their chests, and I love people who just are out there to give value and help people.
Well, I just think we're all in it together. I still genuinely believe with all my heart that property is the easiest way for everyday Australians to build wealth.
Yeah.
I believe it with all my heart.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Total leverage. Awesome. Well, let's go buy a property. See you later.
See ya.
Bye.